or lease.
All right, for the second time, we're doing the proper story this time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Breaking Badger News. I'm your host, as always, the Simpsons kin that is constantly asking what is popping with the players, Max Derritt. And joining me for this particular edition of the show is the Doge in Charge, Brian Martinez, and the Pussycat Punisher and Pun Master, General Wizard in all things, Hannah Wallen. Guys, thanks so much for doing this with me on such short notice. We're not talking about Destiny. That's what we're talking about tomorrow. We're talking about something that's going on at UC Berkeley. Obviously, we all know who Milo is, right? We've been talking about this thing called Free Speech Week for what seems like months. Milo Yiannopoulos, obviously right-wing commentator and provocateur, ever since he was supposed to give a speech last year, I believe it was, sometime around late last year, where it was canceled by Antifa, he has been saying, okay, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to set aside a week later on in 2017 where we bring several different people into Berkeley, the city as well as the university, to speak on a number of different issues. And the speakers that were thought of, most predominantly many of us would know of, Ann Coulter, Steve Bannon, and of course Milo himself. However, Free Speech Week was thought to be canceled after news outlets have been reporting on the fact that, well, apparently it seemed that student groups supposedly failed to submit the quote-unquote necessary payments to secure 2 auditoriums. The university also noted that Berkeley Patriot supposedly only signed the contracts for the venues at the last minute. So up until recently, actually today, when we're recording this on Monday, September 18th, it seemed that Free Speech Week was going to be canceled because of negligence on behalf of the Berkeley Patriot Students Group. Well, Milo Yiannopoulos released a video on his YouTube channel today disproving the claims that the student group was at fault. Rather, unsurprisingly, it was the university's fault. Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at UC Berkeley, Steve Sutton, supposedly has been trying to get Free Speech Week canceled for months. He released a press statement over the weekend saying 2 of the speaking engagements were likely to be canceled due to the supposed ineptitude of the student group. In reality, Berkeley Patriot has been trying to get things settled with the university administration for the past 3 weeks, but their emails and phone calls weren't returned. When the students went to the offices on campus out of frustration for not having their messages returned, apparently, according to Milo, the administrators quote-unquote ran away. Berkeley Patriot and Milo had some questions about the contract details because they didn't want to give away $65,000 without clearing up some legal conundrums. In particular, they wanted to know if they would get the $65,000 back if the events were canceled. And it was only on September 13th, last Wednesday, that Steve Sutton sent the new contract to the group via email. And they had less than 48 hours to get the contract signed and to have the $65,000 ready. No, I'm not kidding. However, naturally, the students still had questions regarding the finances, and those questions weren't answered until roughly 5 hours before the contract deadline. But it gets worse than that. See, Milo's bank is on the East Coast. Therefore, Milo and Berkeley Patriot had only 90 minutes to wire the money to UC Berkeley electronically. Otherwise, the event would have been canceled. After this email was sent as well, just a topper to all this ridiculous nonsense, the university police, under influence from Sutton, withdrew their initial agreement with the student group and proclaimed that they now needed to file 12 separate security applications when originally they only needed 1. Now, I'm going to pass this over to Hannah first because, she was the first one that responded to this information that I sent her. What did you say about it? That this didn't seem becoming of a university, especially one that has such a history with protecting free speech?
No, it's definitely unbecoming of a university with a history like this. In fact, it's really more like scam artist behavior. It's quite obstructionist, and it reminds me very much of 2 different things. The first thing that actually came to mind probably shouldn't have been the first thing that came to mind, but like my parents actually were almost victimized by a predatory sort of lender camping organization that buys mortgages and then engages in obstruction tactics to avoid accepting mortgage payments so that they can foreclose.
Jesus.
And it's illegal, and there's actually been lawsuits and everything. My parents just simply used a local bank to fix that problem. But it's the same kind of behavior that's being described here. But the more I thought about it, the more it bears a resemblance to the obstructionist tactics that Kennesaw University used in Georgia to try to prevent the men's rights group on their campus from having an organization and maintaining their organization and having that organization remain independent of the control of feminist groups on campus. It was the same kind of, especially when they went to see the administrators in charge of this, funding and everything, and they ran away whenever they tried to talk to them. That is something that Sage Gerard, who was the president of Kennesaw University Men, he experienced that exact same thing, trying to talk to university administrators, and they actually prevented him from speaking to university administrators. So this is very much obstructionist tactics, and it's, of all the things for Berkeley, with its history of fostering discourse on civil rights, to actually engage in obstructionist tactics to avoid any civil rights discussion now. That's just an amazing and terrifying 180 that one of the centers for great thought in the United States is avoiding thought.
Yeah.
But wasn't one of the reasons why Berkeley was known as the free speech campus was because they wanted to, there were, in the 1960s, or maybe it was the 70s, there were communist groups that wanted to be able to talk about it, and they used the university essentially gave them the platform, and they were running under the whole, this is a free speech issue as a means to give them the platform, and now the same school is denying it to other people.
Well, it was a couple of things. There were communist groups involved, and there were also there was also civil rights discussion taking place. That in some places it was very hard to have civil rights discussion because you had...
and I mean I would also add, and I'm not trying to use this to disparage the civil rights groups, but there was a lot of overlap between communist groups and civil rights groups, as there is today.
Communist groups had people who infiltrated pretty much everything. That was part of the communist method of operations.
Any group that was essentially fighting for some kind of human rights either came out of communist groups or communist groups infiltrated them, and
that's part of their MO.
Used them for their purposes.
Part of their MO is to try to associate all that stuff with communism, basically to try to associate any civil right with collectivism.
Right. So I mean, I guess what I'm thinking about is if Berkeley is if its politics regarding identity and stuff, which the long march to the institutions had begun before the 1960s, it is quite possible that for them to essentially fight for the freedom of speech of communists and people that could be infiltrated by communists, they would defend their right to speak because they would want... That's sort of like what Berkeley would want too, right? As an institution, which we all know that academia is, leans in that general direction in general when it comes to the, with the staff and the practices. So this isn't. I guess what I'm saying is I don't find it that surprising that Berkeley would go from a pro-free speech for the stuff that they believe in the 1960s and 70s to an anti-free speech platform for the stuff they disagree with in the current year. But I'm basing that just on the little information or history that I know about Berkeley, and I have to make a couple of, I guess, I wouldn't call them leaps of logic, but I'm looking at patterns, and that's what I see.
Yeah, it would actually indicate that it was never about free speech, and it was always about other things. That means that it was
that's
fake,
what I'm getting at.
Basically.
It's not a principled thing. Right. It's just it's a selective kind of thing.
In other words, you can't trust Berkeley to be honest as a university with the public about its goals and its activities.
Right. And because Milo had to write a $65,780 something check so that he could essentially ensure that he can get a platform, safely, because he had to pay that much, is that speech really free?
It's expensive as hell.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's just something else that I was thinking about.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. It shouldn't be shocking that this sort of thing is going on, especially with everything that's been going down in Berkeley over the last year. But even today, it still is, because you don't want to believe that these intricate conspiracies about corruption inside of any institution are real, because it's just so ridiculous, and you can't believe anybody can be that evil. Well, apparently they can. That's also really funny how it's just, free speech becomes an issue only when your particular side of the spectrum is being criticized. But for the record, I think I'm speaking for both Hannah and Brian and myself when I say that even, today, if the communists were trying to have their free speech suppressed, we would defend them as well, because at the end of the day, free speech is ultimately free speech for everybody.
Yeah. If they want to talk about their ideas, and I totally am in favor of giving them a platform. And also, if they want to have a discussion with other people that have opposing ideas, I want to see that happen. Like, if this is what we're looking at, is a battlefield of ideas. That's how it should stay.
Yeah.
And if it moves from an idea, like discussion, a debate, or even an argument into violence, then we have lost. We have failed.
Yeah, in fact,
we cannot allow it to move there.
I would go so far as to say that I wouldn't just support if they wanted to have an open discussion on their ideas. I would say if they're going to express their ideas, they don't get a choice whether people answer them or not publicly. You express something publicly, you have put it on the public table. Other people have the right to publicly analyze it and publicly respond to it. And you can either defend your ideas or you can't.
Especially when it happens at a university.
Yeah, especially when it happens at, because not only are universities supposed to be centers of great thought and centers of learning, they are also centers that are publicly funded. So suppressing political speech would be a reprehensible act.
Yeah, in my personal point of view, even though I say communists, everybody deserves free speech, that doesn't mean I dislike their particular values any less. Like, in my personal opinion, I think communism is a murderous ideology. However, if you give people that spout communist rhetoric a platform, that way they might be more inclined to just let their ideas die rather than, let themselves die, or anybody else that particular ideology tends to kill. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for this particular segment of the story. Do you agree with anything that Brian, I, and Hannah has said? Do you disagree? We'd love to hear what your comments are down below. I'm sure I'm going to get the wrath of the communists after what I just said. That's cool. I want to thank Brian and Hannah for joining me on such short notice. And before we go, I just want to recommend that you guys please give us a like and make sure you subscribe. It really helps the channel out. We do tons of videos like this every single week, and we'd love to continue to do them more, especially if you want to financially support us. If you click on the link that you should see at the top left corner of the screen, you can go to badgerfeed.com, I believe. Oh, no, wait, that's where we keep all the shows, right? I can't remember.
It's Patreon,
Brian,
basically. It's Patreon is where you can help us out. Also, Feed the Badger.
Yes, thanks so much. And that's about it for us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll keep you up to date with everything that goes on with Free Speech Week. I believe that's happening in less than a week. Oh man, it's going to be interesting. Until that time, have a lovely, lovely day.